Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in amma ba'd. So today we're going to continue with the masail of zakah, and we're going to mention a very important mas'ala of zakah, or a couple important things. So the first thing is zakah on debts. So in summary, the fuqaha say that there's two terms the fuqaha use in their books of fiqh, and it's important to know these two terms because some people who would search masail, they may get these two terms wrong and then conclude the wrong mas'ala. The first thing the fuqaha say is called zakatud dayn. The second thing they call it man'ud dayni az-zakah. So zakatud dayn wa man'ud dayn az-zakah. So man'ud dayn az-zakah is a dayn that you owe to somebody. And zakatud dayn is zakah on, do you pay zakah on debt that is owed to you? So that's our first mas'ala. That zakah that is owed to you, do you pay zakah on it? That's number one. Number two, zakah you owe. A debt you owe. We ask whether that debt will cause your nisab to fall low, or what you own to fall below nisab, so that you don't pay zakah. That's the difference between the two. So in summary, the fuqaha say that debts that's owed to you, they say that all debts that are owed to you, you include it in your mind or in your calculations for zakah. The riwayah thaniya is what the Shaykh says, and that's what we're going to mention because the fatwa of many ulama is on it, and that is all debts that are owed to you, you count it for zakah, except if the debt it's a small chance that you'd get the debt repaid. This amount or those amounts, there's no zakah on them. Not even when you get them, you pay zakah on them. And that is, if the person owing you money, your debtor, is a person who, we mentioned it in the beginning of the chapter, is a mumatil or mu'sir or jahid. So he's mumatil. He's a person who he's able to pay, but he keeps saying, I'll pay you tomorrow, I'll pay you next week, I'll pay you next month. And he doesn't pay. He keeps not paying. That's a mumatil. A mu'sir is a person who is bankrupt. Either he has nothing, or what he has is just his main necessities to live. This person is mu'sir. If he owes you money and he is not paying, so that amount, you do not include it in the things you're going to pay zakah on. You deem it as if it's not there. If it happens to come to you, then great. You add it to the rest of your money, and on your day of zakah, then you can calculate it in. Or if you go on the mashhur, this would have its own hawl. If the amount in your hand, excluding this, is already the nisab. We touched on it in the beginning. The third person is a jahid. He's a person who he denies he owes you money. He denies that he owes you money. This wealth, these three types of people, if they owe you a debt, those amounts that they owe you, you don't calculate them for zakah. All other debts that you are owed, you include them in your calculation of zakah. Then you have two options. Either you pay them, it's wajib on you to pay the debts when the money is in your hand. You count back the years. This money I got, it was by the debtor for 5 years. So that amount you have to give zakah on it for 5 years. For 5 years. Right? That's wajib when it's in your hand. Before it's in your hand, while you are doing your calculations every year, you know I have a debt owed to me by so and so and so and so and so and so. It's mustahab, it's permissible or mustahab for you to include it in your calculations today and give zakah on it. Then once it's in your hand, the zakah is done. So you have both options. The first one I mentioned is where it's wajib. The first one, it is permissible to do. That's for debts that are owed to you. Those are for debts that are owed to you. Debts that you owe. The fatwa, we're going to go with that, and also what the Shaykh says. And it's the fatwa of many ulama, because of the situation, the way we live in today is different to the way the fuqaha of the past mentioned these masail. Hence the fatwa is a bit different to the mashhur of the madhab. And that is, the debts that you owe, you only deduct your current short-term debts, not your long-term debts, not your long-term liability. So the zahir, the apparent kalam of the fuqaha is that you count your debts that you owe on the day of zakah. But the fatwa of many ulama, they say that because of the fact that many people's debts, or what they pay is at the end of the month. You may owe rental at the end of the month. Rent is an example that, let's just use it because we're mentioning simple fiqh, but rent has its own fiqh to it. But you owe money, you owe other expenses that you have in your life. You know you're going to owe certain bills at specific amounts at the end of the month, or you owe school fees for your kids, etc. These things that you're going to pay at the end of the month, then you can deduct them. You can deduct them. That which you owe more than the end of this current month, of the month that you're in, that your zakah day comes in, those debts you don't use them to deduct your amount of zakah. But what's important to remember, before one just deducts one's debts, one has to remember that a person's wealth divides into three. A person's wealth divides into three types in this chapter. Number one, your wealth that you give zakah on. Okay? So everything that you're going to calculate zakah on, that's one category. Number two, all those things that are your necessities to live. All of those things that are your necessities to live. So you need a house to live. You need some food to live. You need a few necessities at home. Fridges, beds, tables, a few chairs, a couple of chairs. These your necessities. If you're a businessman, maybe you need a laptop, you need a car. Those things that are your necessities to live. A few pairs of clothing, not excessive. You need a few pairs to live, a decent minimal life. Then those are your necessities. Those are your necessities. Meaning, if a person were to be bankrupt in Islamic law, and the qadi was to sell his assets to pay off the debt, these things will not be sold. They are some of the things I've mentioned here. We'll mention them in more detail, inshallah, in the chapter of this mas'ala. The chapter of this mas'ala, when a person is not able to pay back his debts. So that's your second type of wealth. Then your third type of wealth. And this is a very important point because it links to our mas'ala. And it basically is a very important point for us to know this mas'ala. And that is your types of wealth that do not fall into the above two categories. So they are not wealth that you count for zakah, and they are not wealth that are your necessities, or they form part of your necessities. Form part of your necessities how? For example, you have a building. It gives you rental income. So the building is worth a lot. The rental income it gives you, the rental income you get from that goes towards your living expenses. So then that rental income, that now becomes a need. From one angle, it becomes a need. That building becomes a need. Number two, the rental income, it falls into the category of things that you count for zakah. But then you have extra things that are not part of your necessities, and either your necessities in terms of your living. You would not be affected if these things were not there. Number one. Number two, they are also not zakatable. So you have extra cars. For example. You need one or two. But now you have 3, 4, 5. They're there. You just drive when you wish. It's not for sale. So it's not zakah of trading assets. But it's not for necessity. You need it 1 or 2 for necessity, and maybe 1 or 2 types of those cars for necessity. It does your needs or your family's needs, etc. And you have then extra things. You have extra things at home that are not necessities. Extra TVs or whatever it may be. Or extra cell phones, for example. You need 1 or 2 maybe. 1 for yourself, 1 for work, whatever it may be. Then you have extra. These are deemed extras. You have many rental things that you get rental income from. Let's say you have buildings for rent. You need 1 or 2 to cover your monthly expenses, But you have another 5. The rental income, yes, it's going to count for zakah. It's going to count. You're going to add it to your cash total for your zakah. But the building itself, it's not zakatable and it's not actually needed. It gives you access funds. So here the fuqaha say that if you have things that fall into category 3, then you see their worth. On your day of zakah. If you were to sell it now, how much would you sell it for? Not the price that you want, your actual selling price, that you, if you want to be able to get your money back, to make a profit, not that, but the value of it. What would this item go if it was sold now at market value? Why? Because it's the point is, if you were needing to pay your debt now, then these things you can sell. And they would go at this price. Most likely at this price, the market price, approximately, it would get sold. So you can sell these things and then pay off your debt. So these things that are access and they are not zakatable in another category of zakah, then you see the worth of these things. And you compare it to your debt. So your debt, for example, is 30,000. The amount you're going to pay at the end of this month for your expenses, 30,000. Plus minus. It varies because maybe you have water, electricity bills. You don't know the exact amount, but it varies to a certain amount. So let's say the total comes out to 30,000, 32,000, whatever. Now you see you have extra car, extra 3-4 buildings, and their total worth comes out to 50,000. So then we'd say, in this case, these amounts cover your debt. So on your day of zakah, you do not deduct these debts, because you can pay them off. They do not affect you. And it's not from wealth that you are giving zakah on, and it's not from necessary wealth. But let's say you calculated their worth, it came out to 20,000. Therefore, in this case, if you were needing to pay your debt off and you had to sell these things, and therefore you'd only get 20,000. Your debt is 30,000. So then you see your 30,000 debt, and then you deduct 20,000. So then that 10,000, that's the remainder. Then when you're calculating your zakah, you deduct 10,000 from your debts. So that's how it would work when it comes to calculating your zakah on debts. You don't just deduct, you see extra assets, extra things that are not necessary. Then you check their value, you compare it to your debt. If it's more or less, then you work it from there. If your things are more, then this debt that you have does not affect your zakah. It does not affect your zakah because you can pay it off from assets that do not affect your life. And if the amount is the same, your debts are 30,000 and the assets are 30,000, then there's nothing to deduct. You don't deduct. If it was less, your assets are worth 20,000 or 10,000, your debts are 30,000, then you deduct the difference between the two from your zakah total. So you'll get your total wealth, then you're deducting the 20,000 or the 10,000, whatever it may be, the difference between the two, and then you give your zakah on that amount that is the total thereafter. So the fuqaha say that this debt that you have, once you calculated everything in the manner I'm going to explain, then you're going to deduct your debts. If after that the amount you have is below nisab, no zakah. If after that your amount is above nisab, then you're going to give zakah on that amount. But they say, when it comes to debts, they say the mashhur is that debts affect all your wealth for zakah. Meaning, let's say you have a small amount of cash, but you're a person who has zakah on animals. Let's say you have 40 sheep. So here you have a debt on you. You have a small amount of cash, but you have animals that you're going to give zakah on. So here you'd value your sheep. What is the value of my sheep? Then you take that value, or your crops. What's the value of my crops? Then you deduct your debt from the entire thing. If you have what's left is below the nisab, then no zakah. So you won't only say that I deduct the debts from my cash value or my currency value. No, you'd say what's the value of my animals? It comes out to 40,000. My cash I have 10,000. So you have 50,000. That's what you value. You deduct your debts. I owe 25,000. So your remainder is 25,000. Then nisab is 12,000. So you give zakah. You give zakah. If your animals were 30,000, what you have in your hand is 2,000. Your debts were 25,000. Then your remainder is below the nisab. So here, no zakah. Like that you'd work it. Like that you'd work it. So that's an important mas'ala to know with regards to your zakah on debts. And that's in summary with regards to these masail. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to teach us that which benefits us, and to benefit us with that which He teaches us. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.